Why are you off work so early today? Nurse Chloe. I just saw Mr. Lucas come back, looking radiant and all smiles. Something good must have happened. Could it be that your marriage application got approved? Are you planning the wedding feast? I was about to push open the gate to the courtyard when Sarah, the neighbor picking vegetables next door, spotted me. Facing Sarah's nosy expression, I calculated the timing and replied calmly, "Oh, it's just one of Lucas's friends returning from abroad. No wedding candy for now." Sarah looked a little disappointed. "So, are you and Mr. Lucas getting married before the end of the year? We're all waiting." In my previous life, I was just half a month away from marrying Lucas. But now, I clutched the marriage application hidden in my pocket. Half an hour ago, I realized I had been reborn. The first thing I did was retrieve the marriage application from the office. After brushing off Sarah's questions, I opened the courtyard gate. Lucas was standing right behind it. We came face to face unexpectedly. He was dressed neatly in his work uniform, his broad shoulders, narrow waist, and long legs highlighting his perfect figure. He looked exactly as I remembered. His deep eyes exuded confidence and calmness, with a hint of coldness when they met mine. It took me a lifetime to understand that his coldness wasn't his nature, but stemmed from a deep-seated dislike for me. "How did you know I had a friend coming back from abroad?" Lucas frowned, his probing gaze fixed on me. It seemed he had overheard my conversation with Sarah. Meeting his gaze, I replied calmly, "Didn't you mention it?" Lucas's expression grew more skeptical. "When did I say that?" In my previous life, Lucas's childhood friend, Anna, had also returned today. He had kept it a secret from me until circumstances forced him to introduce her. "You don't remember?" I replied evenly. "If you didn't tell me, how else would I know?" Lucas didn't respond immediately, his gaze scrutinizing me like I was some sort of undercover agent. Seeing my calm demeanor, he seemed to waver, convincing himself that he must have mentioned it without realizing it. Clearing his throat, he said, "Well, I was going to tell you. She's a friend from abroad who doesn't have a place to stay yet. I'm going to help her find one. I won't be back for dinner tonight." I had no intention of cooking for him anyway. "All right, go ahead," I said with a nod. Lucas seemed surprised by how quickly I agreed. I knew why. Lucas was undeniably attractive and, after leaving the military, had become a high school math teacher. He was the center of attention for many women. Naturally, I had always kept a close eye on him. Whenever he went out, I'd ask where he was going and why. Anyone he met, I'd dig into their family background. Over time, he grew annoyed and began sneaking out whenever I wasn't home. Today, he must have planned to do the same, but he didn't expect me to come home early. "What are you staring at? Go on. Don't keep your friend waiting," I urged, waving him off. The sooner he left, the sooner I could get on with my own plans. "Oh, here," Lucas said unexpectedly, pulling a piece of chocolate from his pocket. In my past life, this hadn't happened. I eyed the chocolate in his hand, guessing he had intended to give it to Anna but, for some reason, was now offering it to me. "I don't eat stuff like that. It'll rot my teeth." I refused. I was no longer the girl who would get swept away by his occasional sweetness. I wouldn't forget his dying words to me, "Chloe, the biggest mistake of my life was marrying you. I regret it. I hate it." Seeing my rejection, Lucas tried to explain. "This is chocolate, not candy. I don't care. Take it to someone who does." I interrupted impatiently, brushing past him to enter the house. In this life, let him and his precious childhood sweetheart live or die as they please. Lucas didn't come home that night. I didn't waste my energy guessing what he and his beloved Anna might be doing. Instead, I stayed up all night, writing my application for employee housing. Early the next morning, I submitted the application. The results would take a few days, so I returned to my job and threw myself fully into work. Time passed quietly, and by mid-morning, I had only 2 or 3 patients left. Suddenly, Lucas burst in, carrying Anna in his arms. His strides were hurried as he pushed his way to the front of the line. "Chloe, take a look at my friend. She hurt her leg. Can you stop the bleeding first?" I glanced at them briefly. It was surprising to see Lucas, who had always been disciplined and put others first, cutting in line. His face was filled with worry. "What are you looking at? Hurry up and check her," he urged, his tone impatient. Following his gaze, I saw Anna's calf exposed, with a shallow scratch. If she had arrived any later, the wound might have already scabbed over. "Go to the back of the line," I said calmly. Lucas was stunned. "What?" Raising my voice slightly, I repeated. I said, "Go to the back of the line." This time, he heard me clearly. His expression darkened, and his voice lowered. "Chloe." I ignored him and continued treating the patient in front of me. Lucas hadn't expected me to treat him so coldly. He reached out and tugged my arm. I looked up sharply. "Lucas, you're a teacher. Don't you understand the principle of first come, first served? Or is this how you usually teach your students?" He was caught off guard by my words, his face hardening in disbelief. Sensing the tension, Anna intervened softly. "Lucas, it's okay. Let's go to the back of the line." Hearing this, Lucas stiffened but eventually helped Anna to the end of the queue. When it was finally Anna's turn, I grabbed some iodine and wiped the wound clean to disinfect it. "That's it. Keep it dry and avoid water." Lucas frowned. "That's it? Are you done already?" "What else?" I replied flatly. "Shouldn't you bandage it?" he pressed. I examined Anna's wound again. Sure enough, it had already scabbed over. Unbidden, memories of my past life resurfaced. At 35, after dropping my son off at school, I went to the market and was grazed by a reckless motorbike, leaving a 7-centimeter gash on my calf. Blood poured from the wound. After getting treated at the hospital, my leg was wrapped in so much gauze it resembled a giant rice dumpling. That evening, when Lucas came home from work and learned what had happened, he didn't express concern. Instead, he scoffed. "You're so fragile. That little scratch? Back in my day, my comrades and I took bullets and never made a fuss. You're overreacting. Even going to the hospital. What a waste of money. A little alcohol at home would have been enough." At the time, I thought he was just a man who didn't know how to show care. Looking back now, it was clear. It wasn't that he didn't know how to care. It was that I wasn't that person for him. If it needs bandaging, you can do it yourself. "Mr. Lucas, my shift is over, and I'm going to eat." I placed the basket of gauze down, ignoring his darkened expression, and left with my lunchbox in hand. "Chloe, is that woman Lucas was holding your cousin?" my colleague Linda asked as she approached me during lunch. Cousin? What a familiar term. In my previous life, Lucas, to care for Anna while avoiding gossip, had given her a fabricated identity. Publicly, he claimed Anna was my cousin. Naturally, if her future brother-in-law took care of the cousin, no one would think too much of it. Back then, I had been foolish enough to believe that Lucas and Anna were purely like a brother and sister. As a result, I naively accepted the relationship he fabricated, where Anna became my so-called cousin. "Mr. Lucas is so good to you," Linda said with a teasing smile. "He even extends his care to your cousin. You're truly blessed to be marrying such a thoughtful man." "She's not my cousin," I replied flatly. "She's just a friend Lucas brought back from abroad. She has no family here." Linda's eyes widened in shock, her mouth gaping as if she could fit an egg inside. It took her a moment to process this information. "Oh, well, Mr. Lucas is certainly kind to his friends," she muttered, recovering quickly. Even though this isn't some ancient feudal era, people still tend to make assumptions about men and women in situations like this, especially someone like Lucas, who is already engaged. Carrying an unrelated woman in his arms and rushing into his fiancé's workplace is bound to spark gossip. Even a dog would raise an eyebrow. After Linda walked away, I turned around and saw Lucas standing behind me, his expression dark and unreadable. Once we were alone, he finally spoke. "Chloe, I didn't get the chance to tell you before, but my family and Anna's are old friends. We grew up together. When she was 18, her family immigrated overseas due to some circumstances. She's had a rough time these past few years, losing both of her parents. Now that she's back, she has no one here." I had heard this story before in my previous life. Lucas had used it to portray Anna as a vulnerable girl with no one to rely on, hoping to trigger my sympathy and make me accept her as a cousin. I looked at him calmly and asked, And how does that relate to you telling everyone she's my cousin? Lucas froze for a moment, caught off guard by my directness. In his eyes, I had no remarkable qualities, but he did acknowledge that I was kind and empathetic, especially toward those with no family, people like Anna. She's like a sister to me, he explained. Since she's back, I feel obligated to look after her on behalf of her parents. But as a man, if people hear that I'm caring for her, it might damage her reputation. So, Chloe, could you? I interrupted him. I don't have a habit of taking in sisters. If you truly consider her your sister, then host a proper ceremony. Set up a few tables and formally acknowledge her as your family in front of everyone. Once people know she's officially your sister, no one will gossip. It was a reasonable suggestion, but Lucas remained silent. After all, in his heart, Anna wasn't a real sister. She was his beloved sister. Despite my refusal, Lucas went ahead and told everyone that Anna was my cousin, just like in my previous life. Within days, he brought her to our home. He explained, the guest house where Anna was staying isn't safe right now. I'm worried something might happen, so I invited her to stay here for a couple of days. Anna looked at me with her bright, doe-like eyes. Chloe, I'm really sorry to trouble you like this. I was in the kitchen beating eggs and didn't bother to turn around. Oh, this is your house. You can bring whoever you want to stay. That's right. I was living in Lucas's house. My parents' home had been destroyed in a flood last year, leaving me with no place to stay. But I wasn't living here for free. I paid rent every month, cleaned the entire house, and even covered the grocery bills. At the time, I thought Lucas and I were bound to get married eventually, so I never calculated the cost or considered whether it was fair. Hearing my indifferent response, Lucas gave me a strange look. Thankfully, things went just as he wanted. Lucas responded with a nonchalant then added, Are you cooking? Make a little more. Anna will be eating with us at home from now on. I didn't say a word. Lucas must have thought I was sulking. As he led Anna to arrange her room, he specifically reminded me, Anna doesn't eat onions. Make sure not to add any. Still, I gave him no response. Lucas, Anna said softly, her voice slightly concerned. I noticed Chloe didn't look too happy earlier. Maybe I should go back to the guest house. I don't want to cause any trouble. The house wasn't big, so no matter how quietly they spoke, I could hear them clearly. Lucas reassured her. Don't worry about Chloe. That's just how she is. You're fine staying here. But I heard you two already filed a marriage application. I'd hate for my presence to affect your relationship. Lucas paused for a moment, seemingly reminded of the marriage application we had filed. To be honest, that application hadn't been his idea. At the time, he was having dinner with some leaders from his workplace. They knew about us and felt it was time for Lucas to settle down, so they encouraged him to file it. My guess is that Lucas, thinking he would never see Anna again, reluctantly agreed out of a sense of resignation. But just a few days later, Anna returned. Now, he probably regrets it more than anything. It took him a while to regain his composure. As I carried a bowl of egg noodles back to my room, I glanced through the gap in the door and saw Lucas holding a jar of snowflake cream he had apparently bought at some point. He opened it in front of Anna with a gentle and eager expression. I heard women love this kind of thing, he said, almost nervously. I got it for you. See if you like it. That jar of snowflake cream triggered memories of a nightmare from my previous life. Back then, Lucas had been promoted from a teacher to a grade director, earning a decent salary, but he had always been generous and loved lending money to struggling coworkers. Over time, he brought less and less money home, and there were even times when I had to cover for his good deeds with my own savings. Between taking care of his parents and raising our child, I learned to stretch every penny to its limit. As those days dragged on, I slowly forgot how to take care of myself. One night, Lucas came home drunk. After helping him wash up, I struggled to get him into bed. To my surprise, he cupped my face in his hands and stared at me for a long time. I blushed, thinking he might finally be seeing me in a new light. But then he said coldly, Chloe, why does your face look older than my mother's? So dark and dull. Can't you learn from other women and use some snowflake cream or something? I was stunned, but before I could respond, he closed his eyes and fell asleep. The next morning, I didn't even go grocery shopping. Instead, I went out looking for snowflake cream, only to realize I couldn't afford it. A single jar cost as much as our family's monthly grocery bill. By the time I could afford it, I was already old. When I finally started using it, Lucas caught me one day, staring at me in the mirror for a long time. "What are you smearing on your face? Do you think it'll make you look younger? Stop acting so ridiculous, or you'll set a bad example for the grandkids," he said, then turned and walked away. Back in the present, Anna hesitated as she examined the jar of snowflake cream. "Thank you, Lucas, but I don't usually use this brand. I prefer imported ones." She handed it back to him dismissively. "Why don't you give it to Chloe? She'll probably appreciate it." Sitting in my room, eating my noodles, I heard the door open as Lucas came in with the jar of cream in hand. He frowned as he saw me. "Why are you eating alone?" I didn't even look up. What's wrong with you?" he asked, his irritation growing. I swallowed the last bite of my noodles and met his gaze. "You told me to cook, but I never agreed to it. Besides, there's only enough food in the kitchen for one person. If you two want to eat, buy your own groceries and cook yourselves." "Chloe, what do you mean by that?" Lucas's brows furrowed deeply. "The meaning is simple," I said calmly. "I'm not your maid. I'm not responsible for your meals, laundry, or anything else." Lucas stared at me, stunned. "What do you mean? Your house and my house? Once the marriage application is approved, we'll be husband and wife. Do we really need to draw such clear lines?" I stood up and looked him straight in the eye. "Lucas, are you sure you actually want to marry me?" It was rare to see Lucas looking uneasy in front of me, but this time, he avoided my gaze. "I wouldn't back out, if that's what you're implying," he said with a slight edge of defensiveness. He wouldn't back out. True enough. But he'd also resent me for it for the rest of his life. "I see Anna as my little sister. I hope you can too," Lucas said, avoiding further eye contact. He placed the jar of snowflake cream on the table and quickly left the room. I glanced at the cream sitting on the table, then put it into a drawer, letting it rest atop the folded marriage application. In this life, neither Lucas nor his snowflake cream would hold any power over me. Not long after, Lucas came back through the door. From the sounds I heard through the wall, it seemed he'd gone to borrow a few eggs from the neighbor, Sarah. Lucas had never cooked before, but for Anna's sake, he fumbled around in the kitchen for quite some time. He even managed to fry her an egg in some creative way. I don't know how it tasted, but Anna ate it with a smile, calling him Brother Lucas. As they ate, they started reminiscing about their childhood, talking about when they were 18 and their families faced sudden hardships that forced them apart. Anna's voice broke with emotion. "Lucas, do you remember the promise we made back then?" Lucas didn't say he remembered, nor did he say he didn't. He just let out a non-committal through his nose. Then both of them fell silent. I lay on my bed, sinking into memories from my previous life. That so-called promise between Lucas and Anna, a 7-year vow made when neither was married, was something I only discovered after Lucas's death. It was written on a yellowed piece of paper clenched tightly in his hand. I held that scrap of paper in my hand, feeling an indescribable bitterness. My mind replayed the entirety of my life with Lucas. From the very first time we met, it was near the end of the year. Lucas had just returned from his service, carrying his military bag. He walked through the gate with a piece of paper in hand and asked politely, "Excuse me, is this Guohua's home?" I had been drying persimmons in the courtyard when I turned to look at him. He stood tall and broad, and I couldn't think of any words to describe him. My mind went completely blank except for one thought. "He's so handsome. You're looking for my older brother?" I managed to ask. "He's next door," my father said, stepping out before I could reply. Lucas nodded and thanked him, turning to leave. Before he could go, my father called out, "Wait, who are you to Guohua?" "I'm his son, Lucas," he said, turning his head briefly before walking away. After he left, my father noticed I was still standing there in a daze. "Chloe, what are you still looking at?" "He's already gone," he teased. Blushing furiously, I fled back into the house, my father's laughter echoing behind me. That's how Lucas first walked through the gate of our courtyard and into my heart. On an otherwise ordinary morning, becoming Lucas's fiancée happened the following summer. His father had been bitten by a venomous snake while working in the fields. Although he was rushed to the clinic, there was no antivenom available, and treatment was delayed. Lucas was in the middle of teaching a class when he was called back home. He knelt at his father's bedside, listening to his last words. "I only regret not living to see you get married and have children," his father said. "Dad, I already have someone in my heart," Lucas suddenly said, lifting his head. Everyone in the room turned to him in surprise. "It's Chloe, the daughter of Mr. Cheen. I want to marry her," Lucas declared firmly. The next moment, all eyes were on me. From the moment Lucas said he had someone in his heart, I had felt a pang of disappointment. But when he revealed it was me, I was overwhelmed with joy. In just 3 seconds, I experienced what it meant to rise from the dust to the clouds. "Uncle, I like Lucas too," I said softly. "I'm willing to marry him," I blurted out without thinking. In that moment, I naively believed Lucas truly cared for me. Looking back now, I realize he only said those words to give his father peace of mind before passing. I had been nothing more than a sacrifice for his sense of filial piety. Later, the antivenom arrived in time from the higher-level hospital, and Lucas's father was saved. After that, Lucas never brought up the topic of marriage again, always using work as an excuse. Later still, when my parents passed away in an accident, he could no longer avoid the engagement. "Lucas, those things we said were just childish talk. Don't take them seriously, and don't let it weigh on you," Anna said softly after a long silence outside the room. Lucas didn't respond. Anna continued, her voice faltering. "Chloe is a good woman. It's clear she likes you. You two are a good match." Her tone weakened noticeably on the last sentence, as if she didn't truly believe her own words. I yawned, closed my eyes, and drifted off to sleep. I didn't know how Lucas replied to Anna, but the next morning when I opened the door, I saw the two of them standing in the courtyard. The morning light bathed the yard in a soft glow. Anna was standing in front of Lucas, helping him adjust his tie. Lucas, being much taller than Anna, bent slightly to make it easier for her. The scene was warm and picturesque, almost beautiful. After adjusting the tie, Anna stepped back and smiled in satisfaction. Lucas stretched his neck awkwardly and asked, "Does it look good?" "Of course. This is how professionals dress abroad for work," Anna replied with a playful arch of her brow. "Wait. Don't move. It's a little crooked." Lucas froze in place as Anna reached out to adjust it again. Then, out of nowhere, she leaned in and kissed him lightly on the lips. The unexpected kiss startled Lucas. He instinctively stepped back, bumping into a flower pot, which toppled over with a loud crash. The noise shattered the tranquil morning, and both of them turned to look toward the door. Where I stood, Lucas's expression shifted wildly, as though he was trying to maintain composure but failing miserably. Anna was the first to speak. "Chloe, please don't misunderstand. That was just a greeting custom from abroad." "A greeting custom that involves a kiss on the lips?" Truly, only someone who had spent time overseas could come up with such a bold excuse. I pursed my lips and walked toward them. My natural stern expression must have made Anna nervous because her face turned pale, and she instinctively bit her lip. Pulling my hand out of my pocket, I noticed Lucas quickly step in front of Anna, shielding her. "Chloe, if you have something to say, direct it at me. Don't." He must have thought I was going to hit her. Instead, I took out a dry leaf that had been stuck in my pocket, crumbled it, and let the wind carry it away. Just like my feelings for Lucas. Ignoring Lucas, I glanced at Anna. "Miss Anna, your international customs are quite impressive. But just so you know, Lucas has been dealing with cold sores on his lips for the past few days. Medically speaking, it's a viral infection. You might want to be careful not to catch it." Anna's eyes widened in shock, and I walked away without looking back. The moment I arrived at the clinic, the office director called me over. "Chloe, your request for employee housing has been rejected." "Why?" I asked, confused. "Your quota isn't sufficient," the director replied. In this era, quotas were everything. Without them, it was impossible to get anything done. I was about to plead further when another staff member walked in, interrupting loudly. Young people these days are so unwilling to endure hardship. Can you believe no one wants to sign up? The director turned to him. Still no volunteers? Nope, he replied. It's a tough assignment. But anyone who goes and returns will be in a completely different position. From their vague conversation and my memories of the past life, I suddenly recalled what this was about. The clinic, following higher-level directives, needed to send one medical staff member to the Northwest front line. The moment people heard Northwest, especially during the harsh winter, no one wanted to go. This was clearly an arduous task, and everyone avoided it like the plague. In the past, I also hadn't volunteered, thinking I'd soon be marrying Lucas. In the end, the assignment fell to a newcomer at the neighboring clinic. That person spent 5 years on the Northwest frontline and returned with multiple promotions. By the time they retired, they were enjoying the benefits of a hospital director and had mentored several accomplished students. Afterward, many of my older colleagues deeply regretted not volunteering. If I had known, I'd have gone even if it killed me, they lamented. Director, I'll go. Sign me up. I raised my hand excitedly. The director turned to me, surprised. The tasks are heavy, and time is tight, he said. After confirming my decision, he granted me half a day off to pack my belongings and say goodbye to my family. I had no immediate family left in this town, but my neighbors had always been kind to me, so I bought some groceries and meat, inviting Sarah and the others to my house for dinner. When Lucas and Anna returned, I had just finished setting the table. Why did you make so much food today? Lucas asked, looking at the spread with confusion. Before I could respond, Sarah and the others burst through the door, carrying festive-looking gifts. Chloe, look what we brought, Sarah said cheerfully as she walked in. I stepped around Lucas to greet them. Sister Sarah, Aunt Lila, you didn't have to bring anything. Your presence is enough. How could we come empty-handed when you're treating us to a meal? Sarah teased. Then, with a knowing smile, she added, Chloe, you seem so happy and are even hosting a feast. Did your marriage application with Lucas get approved? Lucas's face immediately darkened at her words. I glanced at him briefly, then at Anna beside him. Her previously cheerful expression had drained of color. Sensing my gaze, Anna held her head and murmured, Lucas, I have a headache. I think I'll go rest in the room. Lucas looked at her, unsure how to comfort her, and could only nod in agreement. The awkward interaction didn't go unnoticed by the others, momentarily cooling the atmosphere. But I said nothing and instead focused on getting everyone to sit down, eat, and drink. Soon, the lively chatter returned. Everyone assumed that Lucas and I were about to get married and began offering their blessings. Wishing you a lifetime of happiness. May you have children soon. They all toasted with warm congratulations. Lucas, however, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, he found an excuse to call me outside. Standing in the faint morning light, his features were partially shadowed. Chloe, he began, his tone tense. Tell me, did the marriage application really get approved? I stared at him and lied. Yes, it did. Even though he should have expected this. Lucas's eyes widened in disbelief, as though it had come much sooner than he anticipated. I watched the discomfort spread across his face and feigned ignorance. The application was approved. Aren't you happy? Happy, he said, forcing the word through clenched teeth. You should be. I replied with a faint smile. After all, it was you who told your father you cared for me and wanted to marry me. Hearing me bring up his past words, Lucas's expression shifted. But Lucas, I continued, my tone growing colder. I'm not happy. Looking back at my life, the biggest mistake I ever made was marrying you. I returned his words from our previous life to him, word for word. Lucas stared at me in shock, unable to comprehend. Chloe, what are you saying? I've made myself perfectly clear. I replied. No, this can't be true. Lucas shook his head repeatedly, his expression shifting from disbelief to sudden realization. He looked at me as though he'd figured everything out. I see now. You're only saying this on purpose, aren't you? I didn't understand what he meant, so I remained silent, taking my silence as confirmation. Lucas grew smug. I knew it. There's no way you'd regret marrying me. You must be jealous because of what happened earlier when Anna kissed me. Right. He crossed his arms and gave me a knowing look. All right, Chloe. Anna has already explained that it was just a Western custom. Don't hold on to it anymore. I smiled without saying a word, which seemed to unsettle Lucas. I really just see Anna as a little sister, he said hastily. His little sister interrupted from behind. Lucas, your good little sister is here. Turning around, Lucas saw Anna standing with a suitcase in hand. He rushed over immediately. Anna, what are you doing? Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. She forced a weak smile when she saw Lucas. Lucas, you and Chloe are getting married. It's not appropriate for me to stay here anymore. I should move out. Move out? Where could you possibly go at this hour? Lucas asked. Avoiding his gaze, Anna murmured, I have a friend. Lucas cut her off without hesitation. Who else do you know here besides me? Anna hesitated briefly, stealing a quick glance at me before continuing. Lucas, I wish you and Chloe a lifetime of happiness together. She took a deep breath, then pushed past Lucas with her suitcase and walked away without looking back. Anna, Lucas called after her, chasing her out the door. As he rushed past me, the wind of his movement carried his scent, just as it had in my previous life. Back then, on the day of our actual wedding, Anna had caused a scene, insisting she had to move out. Lucas had left me, left all the guests who had come to celebrate, and ran after her. The difference this time was that he paused briefly before leaving. Chloe, he said, turning to me, wait for me to come back. Then his figure disappeared into the twilight. I returned to the house. Inside, Sarah and the others had clearly overheard most of what happened outside. Unable to hold back, Sarah commented, Chloe, that cousin of yours doesn't seem like an easy one to deal with. You should be careful. I calmly picked up a bite of food. She's not my cousin. She's Lucas's childhood friend. His little sister with no blood relation. The room fell silent, and everyone exchanged awkward glances. Once the guests left, I took out the bag I had already packed and walked out without a second glance. I left nothing behind in that house, except for the voided marriage application and that jar of snowflake cream. Meanwhile, Lucas caught up to Anna in the dim alley at the end of the street. Anna didn't say a word, only threw herself into his arms and sobbed uncontrollably. After she had cried herself out, Lucas finally spoke. It's too late to find a place to stay tonight. Why don't you come back with me? No, I don't want to go back, Anna protested, refusing no matter what. With no other choice, Lucas brought her to a guest house instead. Lucas, I'm scared, Anna said, clutching his sleeve as he tried to leave. Can you stay with me tonight? When Lucas turned back to look at her, he was met with her tear-filled eyes. For some reason, the image of me standing in the courtyard earlier flashed in his mind. My gaze cold, distant, and unfamiliar. He distinctly remembered that I never used to look at him like that. His thoughts grew chaotic, and he blurted out, No, I have to go back. Anna was stunned, clearly not expecting such a quick rejection. She bit her lip, her demeanor shifting. You're going back to see Chloe, aren't you? Of course. She's your wife now. You should go back to her. After all, I'm just your little sister with no real ties to you. Lucas hesitated, wavering slightly. Sensing her moment, Anna gave him a light push. Lucas, don't worry about me. Go back so Chloe doesn't have to wait for you. That small push seemed to make up Lucas's mind. You're right. A woman staying here alone isn't safe. He picked up an extra blanket from the room, laid it on the floor near the door, and declared, I'll sleep here tonight. Anna had gotten what she wanted, but any further attempts were thwarted. Lucas held his ground and refused to cross the line. He didn't step onto her bed no matter how hard she tried. The next morning, Lucas took Anna out to find a place to rent. By the time everything was settled, it was already evening. As he thought about Chloe, guilt crept into his heart. Stopping by a small shop, he bought some of her favorite snacks. Calculating the time, he figured Chloe would probably be at home making dinner by now. Lucas pushed the door open, ready with a pre-planned explanation. Last night, I took Anna to the guest house and was just about to come back when. But he stopped mid-sentence. The kitchen was empty. There was no sign of Chloe anywhere. His brow furrowed, and he quickly turned to open her bedroom door. The room was spotless and orderly but completely empty. A strange uneasiness crept over him, spreading like wildfire. He searched the small house again, checking every corner and even going in and out of the courtyard twice. Finally, he approached the neighbor. "Sarah. Sister Sarah," Lucas called out, trying to sound calm. "Have you seen Chloe?" Normally, Sarah would greet him with a warm smile and a friendly tone. But today, her expression turned cold, as if she had seen something unpleasant. She quickly replied, "Haven't seen her," and retreated into her house. Lucas sensed something was off but didn't dwell on it. Finding Chloe was the priority. He went back inside the house, and this time, he noticed something on the table that had escaped his attention before. As he stepped closer, his entire body froze in place. On the table lay the voided marriage application and the unused jar of snowflake cream. Chloe's words from the night before echoed in his mind. "Lucas, I'm not happy. Looking back at my life, the biggest mistake I ever made was marrying you." It felt like a bolt of lightning had struck him, leaving his head buzzing. He muttered to himself, "How is this possible? How?" Even now, he couldn't believe Chloe's words were true. He vividly remembered the way she had looked at him the first time they met, her eyes sparkling, as if she had found a treasure. Someone who adored him that much couldn't just walk away. Lucas jumped on his bike and pedaled furiously to the office where they had submitted the marriage application. When he arrived and inquired, he was told that Chloe had taken the application back over 10 days ago. Learning that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, Lucas panicked. He got back on his bike and headed to the clinic, hoping to confront Chloe and ask her why. When he arrived, the head nurse looked at him, drenched in sweat, and said, "Mr. Lucas, are you looking for Chloe? She's already gone to the Northwest front line. Didn't you know?" Lucas shook his head, his body drenched as though he had been pulled out of water. Pushing his bicycle, he walked aimlessly down the road. "Mr. Lucas, did you find Nurse Chloe?" Several acquaintances passed by, all aware that he had been searching for her. Lucas, his face pale, shook his head. The others didn't seem surprised. After he had walked a little further away, they began whispering among themselves. Chloe was such a good woman, but he ruined it. Serves him right. What do you mean? You don't know? That Anna woman Lucas keeps introducing as Chloe's cousin? She's not her cousin at all. She's Lucas's beloved little sister. What? His little sister? And he brought her to their home? Isn't that just humiliating Chloe? Exactly. It's outrageous. Hearing this as he doubled back, Lucas couldn't hold back and shouted, "What nonsense are you talking about?" The group flinched for a moment but quickly regained their composure. After all, they knew they weren't lying. "Mr. Lucas, whether it's nonsense or not, you know the truth. You have a fiancé, yet you're fooling around with another woman. Don't think we didn't see you and Anna entering the guest house together and staying there all night." Lucas stammered, "We're innocent." "Innocent? How innocent can you be? Spending the night together in a guest house?" One of them scoffed. "A man like you doesn't deserve Chloe." They spat on the ground in disgust and walked away, leaving Lucas standing there, stunned. Days passed, and it gradually sank in. Chloe had truly left him. In the past, he never thought Chloe was that important to him. But now, whenever he saw someone picking persimmons, the memories would overwhelm him. Lucas often found himself lost in thought, recalling an image of Chloe climbing a tree, her sleeves rolled up. She sat high on a branch, holding a ripe persimmon and calling down to him, "Lucas, look, isn't this one bright red?" He would take a step closer and reply, "It's red." "What's red?" Anna's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to reality. She was standing beside him, holding a lunchbox. Startled, Lucas glanced at her and asked, "Why are you here?" Anna smiled sweetly. "I came to bring you lunch." Lucas looked at the lunchbox in her hand, his expression hesitant. Having lived abroad for years, Anna's idea of a meal consisted of cold bread, boiled eggs, and a few salad leaves. Nothing like Chloe's steaming pork dumplings. I've already eaten, Lucas finally said after some deliberation. Anna looked crestfallen. Before she could respond, the school principal appeared, calling out to Lucas, "Mr. Lucas, can you come with me for a moment?" Lucas followed the principal, and 15 minutes later, he emerged from the meeting looking troubled. Anna was still waiting outside. "Lucas, what's wrong?" she asked, hurrying to his side. He shook his head silently. When Anna tried to take his arm, he gently but firmly brushed her hand away. Soon after, news of the meeting began to spread. A parent had filed a complaint against Lucas, accusing him of improper behavior with women and claiming it could negatively influence the students. As a result, Lucas was disqualified from receiving an award for outstanding teacher performance. When Anna heard about it, she stormed into the principal's office, causing a chaotic scene in an attempt to defend Lucas. By the time Lucas arrived to stop her, the room was in complete disarray. "Anna!" Lucas barked, expecting comfort. Anna looked at him with tear-filled eyes. Instead, she was met with his sharp rebuke. "What were you thinking? Who gave you the right to interfere in my affairs?" "But Lucas, I was only trying to stand up for you," Anna protested, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't need your help," Lucas snapped. Anna burst into tears. Outside the office, teachers who had witnessed the scene began whispering among themselves. "So, that's the sister Lucas brought back from abroad," one muttered. "She's nothing like Nurse Chloe," another replied with a sigh. "Lucas's life is going to be tough from now on." Lucas overheard their comments. He hadn't realized before how highly others regarded Chloe. In their eyes, the woman he once found plain and ordinary was, in fact, exceptional. After the incident, Lucas was reassigned from teaching math to teaching physical education, giving him more time to think. And the more he thought, the more he found his mind drifting to Chloe. Her braids, her red floral jacket, the way she had looked at him with her clear, bright eyes the first time they met. The more he thought of Chloe, the less he thought of Anna. He convinced himself that if he waited long enough, Chloe would return, and everything could be salvaged. But Anna had no intention of waiting. One night, when Lucas was drunk and wallowing in his own misery, Anna climbed into his bed. The next morning, before the neighbors were fully awake, Anna staged a dramatic scene. She stormed out of Lucas's house, disheveled and crying, threatening to throw herself into the river. The scandal spread like wildfire, and Lucas's reputation was completely ruined. Left with no choice, he married Anna, far away on the Northwest front line. I knew nothing of this. I didn't have the time or energy to speculate about Lucas and Anna's ultimate fate. As the new year approached, I performed an emergency C-section on a mare struggling with a difficult birth. Among the group that came to thank me afterward was a doctor. After hearing about the surgery, he gave me a piece of advice that changed my career trajectory. "You've got steady hands," he said. "Being a nurse doesn't do you justice. You should consider pursuing surgery, if you ever get the chance. I hope to see you at the hospital in the capital." Before leaving, he handed me a few medical books. It felt like I had finally found my calling. I pored over those books again and again, committing every word to memory. In the days that followed, whenever a herder's cattle or sheep faced complications during birth, they would call on me to perform the surgeries. And so, life went on, day by day. My life now was the complete opposite of my previous one. I finally understood the meaning of freedom, living entirely for myself. I never thought about Lucas again. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. My assignment at the Northwest Frontline came to an end, and I returned to the clinic I had left so long ago. The director, who had seen me off back then, personally came to pick me up. "Chloe," he greeted warmly. "Welcome back." Then, he handed me a transfer letter. "This just came in. It's from the hospital in the capital. They specifically requested you." Opening the letter, I immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from Dr. Du, the mentor who had changed the trajectory of my career 5 years ago. Over the years, I had stayed in touch with him, writing to him whenever I faced challenges or had questions. Despite his busy schedule, he always replied thoughtfully and thoroughly. That evening, my colleagues at the clinic organized a farewell and welcome back dinner for me at the state-run restaurant. After eating and drinking their fill, The conversation inevitably turned to the events of the past 5 years, particularly those involving Lucas and Anna. Since marrying Anna, it seemed Lucas's life had taken a turn for the worse. Not only had he lost his teaching position, a once stable job, he had recently secured work as a library assistant, only to lose that too. The reason? Anna had seen him speaking to a female coworker, flown into a jealous rage, and publicly attacked the woman, pulling her hair and shouting. The incident left Lucas humiliated and unemployed once again. Anna, emboldened by her pregnancy, faced no consequences and became even more brazen. Their family was now shunned by everyone in the area. Stories like this weren't uncommon. "If I were Lucas," one colleague said with a sigh, "I'd regret it so much by now." "Exactly. He let Chloe slip through his fingers," another chimed in, and several pairs of eyes instinctively glanced at me. I smiled lightly, unfazed, and continued eating. After the dinner ended and everyone had left, I heard someone call my name. Looking up, I saw Lucas standing across the street. It had been 5 years, but he looked like he had aged 20. His hair was streaked with gray, and his once straight posture was now slightly hunched. He stared at me, his eyes shimmering with regret. "Chloe," he said, his voice trembling. "I was wrong. I never should have said those things to you." In that moment, I realized he might have also been reborn. As for his apology, it wasn't just directed at me but also at the life he had ruined in this timeline. His expectations, shaped by his past life, had shattered. The price he paid had been far too steep, and the outcome far worse than he ever imagined. Before I could respond, Sarah appeared, and I turned to open the gate to my courtyard. "Lucas! Lucas!" Anna's shrill voice echoed from the alleyway. At the sound, Lucas's face twisted with frustration and weariness, as though her cries were a curse chasing him down. I never thought I'd see the day he looked at someone he once cherished so much with such disdain. As Anna came running after him, I turned and walked away. From behind, I heard her scream, "Lucas, are you here to see that whore Chloe? Let me tell you, as long as I'm alive, you'll never be with her. Never. If I have to die, I'll take you with me. Lucas, say you love me. If you don't, I'll jump right now." Her hysterical cries and the sound of their struggle gradually faded into the distance. Thought suddenly occurred to me. In our previous life, Lucas had left too hastily, and I never had the chance to tell him that Anna had a severe hereditary mental illness. Why hadn't it surfaced back then? Perhaps it was because, as a solitary woman basking in the glow of love, her symptoms had been kept at bay. I walked to the end of the road and looked up at the vast night sky filled with stars. Among the countless stars, one shone just for me. My future lay ahead, and it was full of promise. After the morning criticism meeting, Adam Johnson used his influence in the afternoon to have me reinstated as a primary school teacher. In truth, the team had only intended to give me a warning. They didn't actually want to reassign me. After all, I was the only teacher in the school responsible for educating dozens of children. Adam and I walked out of the team's shabby office together. After a whole day of being pushed around, I felt drained and wanted nothing more than to return to my place and rest. Just as I turned to leave, Adam grabbed my arm. "Claire, don't you have anything to say?" he asked. I narrowed my eyes at him, my expression sharp and cold. "Shouldn't you be the one saying something?" My tone was pointed, a stark contrast to my usual demeanor. He hesitated, clearly unprepared for my abrupt change. In the past, I had always been gentle and considerate, putting him first in everything. In my previous life, I discovered that the city transfer quota I had worked so hard to earn was taken by Adam and given to someone else. I wrote him an angry letter and confronted him, but all he did was submit a marriage application to the organization, promising to marry me as soon as I returned to the city. Seeing the bright red approval stamp on the application, my resentment evaporated. I forgave him, dismissed his wrongdoing, and obediently stayed in the countryside for 3 more years. But things are different in this life. I won't forgive him so easily. Adam looked at me, his gaze scanning my face repeatedly, his confusion evident. "Are you angry?" he asked cautiously. I frowned and gave him a deliberate once-over, scrutinizing him as if he were a stranger. My calm but critical gaze made him visibly uneasy. "So, He does know how to feel guilty, I thought. A cold laugh escaped my lips. Angry? Of course. I'm angry. That city quota. I earned it through my own hard work. What right did you have to give it to someone else? What did they offer you in exchange? His face turned pale, and he stumbled back a step, visibly shaken. I seized the moment to press further. If you want to look out for your own interests, fine. But don't you dare use me as your stepping stone. That quota was mine. The organization gave it to me. What makes you think you can trade away something that belongs to me? Adam's complexion grew even paler, and his expression was one of panic. It's not like that. Claire, listen to me. He stammered. It was Mike who begged me for help. He said his girlfriend was sick and needed to return to the city for treatment, but they didn't have a chance. And since Sarah was in the same commune as you, I made the decision to give the quota to her. I know this hurt you, but as soon as you return to the city, we'll get married. Okay, isn't that enough? He looked at me with pleading eyes, his tone unusually gentle. Despite the mutual affection and the engagement arranged by our families, it was rare for him to lower himself like this. After all, he came from a well-off family and had always carried himself with pride. Enough. I yanked my arm free from his grip. You say Sarah is Mike's girlfriend. Who can prove that? And who can prove there's nothing improper between you and her? My words struck him like a bolt of lightning. He stood there stunned, too shocked to respond. I won't let this go. I said coldly. I'll report this to the organization. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away. Of course, I knew Adam's capabilities. The matter of the city quota was already irreversible, and my words were just a bluff to unsettle him. I had other plans in mind. I was determined to seek justice for myself. My parents were still waiting for me back home. In my previous life, my grandmother passed away a year after this incident, and I hadn't made it back in time to see her one last time. She had raised me herself and was closer to me than even my parents. During those moments of grief, I had foolishly longed for Adam's comfort, writing him letters and hoping he would come to console me. But his response came much later, simply saying he was too busy to visit and urging me to take care of myself. Depending on others to save you is inherently foolish. And I had done plenty of foolish things in my past life. It took me 3 years to return home in that lifetime. By then, the college entrance exams had already been reinstated twice. Without good study materials in the countryside, I had planned to put in extra effort once I got back to the city, but the third exam was much harder than the first two, and I failed in my haste. Around that time, Adam's family sent someone to propose marriage. Both families readily agreed, and I married him. I had originally planned to study for another year and try again, but Adam's mother fell ill and needed someone to care for her. I had to juggle my studies while also taking care of her. My father had once saved Adam's father during a flood rescue operation, and the bond between our families ran deep. Adam's mother had even taken me to stay with their family for a few months. At the time, she was kind and warm. However, once she realized that Adam had feelings for me, she sent me back home in an extremely dignified manner. She spoke to my parents, saying it was a good thing that the two of us cared for each other. But Adam was about to take his college entrance exams, and I was also at the right age for schooling. She suggested that we get engaged first. But later, when we became mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, the inherent tensions between us emerged. She began to scrutinize me, finding fault in everything I did, even when I tried my best to take care of her. Despite the fact that their family had hired professional caregivers, she was still dissatisfied and often spoke poorly of me in front of Adam. Under the pressure, I had to devote even more energy to her, and as a result, I missed my second chance at the college entrance exam. I still wanted to try for a third time, but that year, I became pregnant, with my due date falling the same month as the exam. After enduring repeated hardships in life, I finally gave up on my education and resigned myself to a path of no return. After giving birth to my first child, I soon had a second. The relationship between my mother-in-law and me deteriorated into utter chaos, and my once loving relationship with Adam slowly eroded. By the time I failed my second college attempt, Sarah had already graduated from university. Mike had gone abroad for further studies, and before leaving, he entrusted Sarah to Adam's care. At that point, Sarah had already achieved great success, becoming a university professor, a job many envied. Adam, too, continued to rise steadily in his career. The longer Mike was away, the closer Adam and Sarah became. They discussed politics, economics, interpersonal relationships, and social dynamics. They listened to songs from Hong Kong and Taiwan, attended plays and movies together, and even learned ballroom dancing. Their progress was mutual, and eventually, they reached the pinnacle of their success. Meanwhile, I was weighed down by family responsibilities, slowly boiling like a frog in warm water until I became indifferent to everything. Things only escalated when Mike returned from abroad and discovered that the money he had been sending to Sarah had all been lost in stock market investments. He was furious and beat Sarah severely. Adam tried to mediate, but it ended in a physical fight between the two. Mike spat out a mouthful of blood and, with a look of utter contempt, sneered at Adam, saying, "You can't trust a friend's wife. Adam, you've outdone yourself. Truly, you know a man's face but not his heart." After that, Mike and Sarah broke up completely. Even though Sarah no longer had a reason to meet Mike, she and Adam continued to stay in touch. Mike, unable to accept this, spread rumors everywhere, calling them shameless and accusing them of being a disgraceful pair. He even went to Sarah's home, causing a scene and demanding his money back. Later, without my knowledge, Adam used our family's savings to pay Mike back on Sarah's behalf. That wasn't a small amount of money. Most of it was mine. Though Adam had a high salary, the amount Mike had earned abroad was astronomical by the standards of the time. There was no comparison. At the time, I was working as a factory laborer. Coincidentally, the glass factory I worked at went public, and I received internal employee shares. I made a decent profit from them, but that money was taken by Adam to help Sarah. It wasn't until my mother fell seriously ill and needed money for treatment that I discovered our savings were completely depleted. Unable to afford treatment in Beijing, my mother passed away shortly afterward. My younger brother, desperate to raise money for her medical expenses, resorted to illegal activities and was prosecuted. My father, devastated by these events, suffered a stroke, leaving him paralyzed and unable to speak. I wandered the streets in a daze, directionless and utterly lost, until I collapsed on the sidewalk. When I regained consciousness, I found myself 10 years in the past. In my previous life, I made one mistake after another. I had experienced deep regret and self-reproach, even resentment for having married Adam. But now, I know that the future holds brighter days for my country, and for me. Will take action. This time, I no longer crave the things I once missed out on. I have better plans now. Even attending college is nothing more than a stepping stone for me. Adam caught up to me again, grabbing my arm. "If you're angry, let it all out. You can hit me like you did last night if that helps." I stared at him coldly, the hatred slipping through despite myself. His pupils widened in shock as he looked at me, disbelief etched on his face. "Claire, I didn't know you'd be this upset. If I had, I wouldn't have agreed to Mike's request." I tilted my head and gritted my teeth. "I don't care about Mike or Sarah or anyone else. You'll fix this now and get me back to where I was." Adam lowered his head in defeat. "I've already interfered with one personnel adjustment. I can't do it again." I had anticipated this response. It wasn't that he couldn't. It was that he wasn't willing to bear the cost. He had already overreached, and doing so again would attract criticism from the organization and jeopardize his career. He couldn't meet my scornful gaze and covered his eyes with his hand. When he looked at me again, his eyes were filled with sorrow. "I promise you, I'll find another way," he said softly. I shook off his hand and gave him one last cold glance before resolutely turning and walking away, as if letting me hit him a few times would make everything go away. It wasn't that simple. Last night, Adam had come to find me. It was already late by the time he arrived. We had finished dinner, and the team had hosted him as a courtesy. He understood the significance of the gesture, so he stayed longer than usual. By the time he came looking for me, I was already in bed. He knocked on my door. Bang, bang, bang. The sound echoed in the dark, unnervingly loud, fearing it would disturb others. I got up reluctantly. There was no electricity in the village, so I lit a candle by moonlight. The shadows on the wall stretched grotesquely, making them look like monsters. The night air was cold, and I threw on my clothes haphazardly, muttering curses under my breath. When I opened the door, Adam was waiting outside, his handsome face starkly illuminated against the desolate, dilapidated backdrop of the village. His presence, refined and striking, seemed out of place. Seeing him brought a surge of anger. I didn't care if the neighbors overheard as I unleashed my fury. Knock, knock, knock. What the hell is wrong with you? Did someone in your family die? Adam stumbled back a few steps, visibly startled, his earlier confidence completely drained. Swallowing his retort, he cautiously pulled me aside, whispering, "Don't let others hear. It'll look bad." He led me to the shadow of an old locust tree, where even the moonlight couldn't reach. His tone softened as he spoke. "Your family wrote to say you're upset. Why didn't you tell me about it?" I rolled my eyes, recalling the scenes from my past life. Would I really write to him again in this life, only to wait for him to submit another marriage application? My plans and whereabouts were naturally something I had to explain to my family. But Adam? He wasn't worth the effort. "You," I replied icily. "I wouldn't dare aim so high. I don't need your charity, and I certainly don't want your harm. Consider our engagement null and void." I saw a flicker of shock in his eyes, followed by what seemed like the glint of tears. "Don't say things you don't mean," he pleaded. "I thought being a primary school teacher here would be better for you than Sarah's situation, so I agreed to help Mike." "Don't spout nonsense," I snapped, cutting him off angrily. "Help whoever you want. I don't care. But you had no right to take what was mine and give it away. Even if we were married, what's mine is still mine. You've got some nerve." Even in the dim light, I could see his face tighten at my words. I could see how utterly embarrassed he was. I continued, "I know exactly what kind of person Sarah is. Far better than you do. We're all from the city. First, none of us could handle the labor here, but we stuck it out. She, on the other hand, is always complaining and playing sick every few days. You might be blind to it, but everyone else sees her for who she really is. The organization left her here for a reason. And you're just as foolish. A good-looking face is wasted on you." His chest heaved with anger, but he managed to calm himself after a while. Cautiously, he said, "If you're really upset, just hit me. Take it out on me." I laughed. I've been wanting to do that for a long time. Without hesitation, I raised my hand and slapped him several times. His expression was one of pure shock as I turned and walked away. His suggestion was absurd. If I hit him barehanded, others might think I was being playful, indulging in some couple's spat. But if I truly hit him with force or used a tool, I could cause real harm, and his hypocritical, manipulative mother would never let me off. Still, I didn't mind. In situations where the power dynamics are unequal, slapping someone's face is the most satisfying. They say you shouldn't hit someone's face, but this was just the beginning. I had a bigger plan in store, and I was ready to serve the main course. When Adam was about to leave, he asked to see me. At the time, I was teaching in the classroom. Through the window, I saw his flustered figure outside. I put down the book and went out to meet him, catching him by surprise. His face lit up with a hint of joy. I spoke directly. "Do you have any money on you? I lost my paycheck this month and can't find it anywhere." Without hesitation, he pulled out all the cash he had and handed it to me. I noticed a leather belt in his luggage and casually grabbed it as well. He froze, seemingly thinking I was no longer angry. "It's not much, but I'll send you more when I get back." Seeing that I neither argued nor lashed out, he pressed further. "I've been saving up quite a bit. I plan to give it to you when we got married. But if you're short on money, I can hand it over now." I cast him a cold glance, turned, and walked away. In my heart, I felt nothing but disdain for this man. In this life, I hadn't written to him, crying and complaining. Instead, I had written to my family. My parents must have approached his family, which is why he had come running. The pressure from his family and society had knocked him off his high horse. He could no longer dismiss me with a mere marriage application. Living this life again, I understood something clearly. A wife's position is something she secures for herself. My previous life had taught me that the main reason I was so disregarded was that I hadn't been ruthless enough. In my past life, I watched a TV series called Yearning. There was a character named Lu Huifang who reminded me of myself. Gentle, accommodating, and always sacrificing her own needs to help others. It suddenly struck me how meaningless that kind of life was. This time, I would boldly pursue what I wanted, even if it meant being labeled a shrew. I wouldn't care. Of course, I hadn't really lost my paycheck. The reason I asked Adam for money was that I needed to make a trip back to the city. Someone had to pay for my travel expenses. I went to the team leader, asked for leave, and explained that my father was ill and I needed to visit him. I handed him the leather belt as a gift, which he nervously accepted before granting me an extended leave. I returned to Harbor City without anyone knowing. Once home, I reunited with my family and spent some quality time with them. Then, using my left hand to disguise my handwriting, I wrote a detailed report outlining how my city transfer quota had been taken away from me. I made sure to include every detail. Finally, I approached Adam's biggest career rival and handed over the report. As someone who had lived this life once before, I knew exactly how to play my cards. I knew everything about Adam Johnson's situation, including where he lived. The night I approached his rival, I deliberately pulled my scarf higher to obscure my face. All I said was, "See for yourself if this is real or not. Decide how you want to use it. The person involved will cooperate." With that, I turned and walked away, giving him no chance to dig deeper. This matter was already clear-cut. It simply needed someone to act on it. Before I even returned to the countryside, word reached me that chaos had erupted on Adam's side. His secret manipulation of the city transfer quota had been fully exposed. The organization held a public meeting to discuss his actions, and Adam was forced to make a formal self-criticism. I heard it was the first major setback of his life. Standing on stage with his speech in hand, his hands trembled visibly. His once spotless reputation was now tarnished, making him the target of ridicule among his rivals. Meanwhile, I quietly returned to the village to await further notice. A work group from the city came to investigate, verifying the details of how my quota had been taken. Both the commune and the local team spoke on my behalf, and I finally regained my place in the city. I had altered my fate and, for the first time, taken a step in the right direction. It was only after I returned to the city that I learned Sarah had taken advantage of this opportunity to get a health checkup. It turned out she truly had some medical issues, which allowed her to stay in the city. Fate seemed to move like a set of gears, each piece turning as designed, though some differences remained. For example, my earlier return meant the job at the cardboard factory went to me, leaving my brother temporarily without work. I planned to wait a few months for the announcement of the restored college entrance exams, then buy study materials and prepare. The work at the factory was light, and I could study while working. For my brother, I intended to formally break off my engagement with the Johnson family and ask Adam's father to help arrange a job for him in return for my earlier support. That was the plan. But things took an unexpected turn. The workshop supervisor at the cardboard factory started bringing me meals. His family seemed to have connections at the supply cooperative, allowing him access to premium pork belly. He would carefully pack it into a lunchbox, steam it in the cafeteria's large steamer, and happily hand it to me. After several instances, it became clear to both me and those around us what his intentions were. In that era, such gestures often meant an impending marriage. But I had my own path to follow and couldn't entangle myself with him. Just as I was trying to navigate this situation, Adam's family came to formally propose marriage again. I thought long and hard before finally agreeing to marry Adam Johnson. At least it was an environment I was familiar with, and I had the advantage of knowing what was to come. I could control my fate. My earlier success in reclaiming my city quota was proof enough that I didn't need to fear him or avoid him. This decision also meant my brother could smoothly follow his path, just as he had in the previous life. The cardboard factory would later undergo privatization, and my brother would become a private business owner. If it weren't for our mother's medical expenses, he would have had an even brighter future. The wedding date was set for 3 months later. During that time, Adam tried to visit me several times, but I deliberately avoided him. Eventually, he showed up late at night and cornered me at home. With my parents present, we met in my room. He was as handsome as ever. though the confident arrogance he once exuded had dimmed somewhat. It was clear he had endured significant hardship recently. His face carried a trace of grievance as he handed me an envelope. Inside was around $1,000. I refused to accept it, pushing it back at him, but he maintained his stance, insisting I take it. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he kept his head slightly lowered, avoiding my gaze. "I know you're still upset," he said quietly. "I know I was wrong. I promised last time that I'd give you my savings. This time, I specifically brought it to you," Adam said, handing me the envelope. "I withdrew it from the bank. You can deposit it into your own account." His words stirred something within me. In my previous life, my mother had developed an occupational illness from working in the factory. She hadn't been mindful of self-protection, and her condition worsened over time. This time, I thought, I could use this money for her benefit. With the reforms from the new policies, labor insurance or even a small business might just be the perfect solution. I squinted slightly, a faint, inscrutable smile playing on my lips. "You're true to your word, Adam. That's good. It somewhat redeems your character," I said lightly. I praised him deliberately, lifting him up just enough so he couldn't step down from the pedestal of being the good guy. That way, he'd be more inclined to agree to my next request. I neither accepted nor rejected the money but instead shifted the conversation. "So, is this just a one-time gesture? Or are you planning to hand over your salary to me from now on?" He froze, staring at me in disbelief. The spoiled young master, who had never wanted for anything, seemed unable to grasp what I was implying. I clarified, "If you're truly sincere, then from now on, you'll give me your paycheck, and I'll give you an allowance. We'll live properly as a couple. If you're not sincere, then take this money back. I don't need it." Realizing what I meant, he quickly stammered, "Of course, I'll give you my salary from now on." I replied nonchalantly. Among the women known as strong wives in the village, who didn't have an iron grip on their household finances. With this, let's see how Sarah would dare take advantage of me again. I had a score to settle with her. Adam must have thought this move would please me, and he let out a sigh of relief. The wedding at the Johnson family was extravagant. While most families held receptions at home, his family chose the Bright Star restaurant. The guest list was extensive. Almost all their relatives and friends attended. I carried myself with grace and composure, to the point where even Adam's mother regarded me with a newfound respect. However, subconsciously, I kept searching for someone amidst the crowd. What an ironic twist of fate it was when I saw him, as Adam and I made our rounds to toast the guests. He offered cigarettes and drinks to the men while I handed out candy to the women. When we reached Mike's table, he stood up with Sarah by his side. Mike spoke first, his voice filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, brother. I caused you trouble." "It's nothing," Adam replied generously, patting him on the shoulder. Mike then turned to me, his expression more nervous. My face turned cold, my earlier smile disappearing entirely. This made Mike even more uneasy as he hurriedly said, "I'm sorry, sister-in-law. I didn't think things would escalate like this. If I had known, I wouldn't have done it. Not even if you'd beaten me to death." Adam looked at me expectantly, hoping I'd offer some forgiving words. But I was waiting for someone else. Sarah, true to her demeanor in my past life, stood there delicately, as if she might collapse at any moment. Her graceful and fragile aura, resembling a poetic figure from a painting, drew attention. She carried herself with an air of pity, her movements light and ethereal, reminiscent of a tragic heroine. When my gaze swept over her, it was like an icy dagger piercing her. I couldn't forget how, in my previous life, Adam had taken all our family savings to pay off her debts. When I had gone to her for help, explaining that my mother desperately needed the money to save her life, Sarah had simply looked at me with indifference, her attitude dismissive. She didn't say a word, only stared at me as if I were insignificant, as though mocking me to take it up with Adam. Her friend, standing beside her, had spoken for her, sneering, "No money for you. What do you want? Her life instead." As I stumbled away, my heart heavy with despair, I overheard Sarah whisper to her friend, loud enough for me to hear, "The saddest thing for a woman is losing control of her own husband." A true snake in the grass. A beauty with a venomous heart. Today, facing her again, I had no intention of letting her off so easily. I fixed my gaze on Sarah, cold and unreadable. Her lips were already pressed together tightly, her expression heavy with tension. She glanced nervously between Mike and Adam, unsure of where to land her gaze. Adam tugged lightly on my sleeve, signaling for me to ease up and not escalate the situation. "What are you pulling my sleeve for?" I asked loudly, my voice cutting through the noise around us. The lively chatter of the guests fell noticeably quieter as people turned their attention toward us. Adam, ever the cautious one, leaned in to murmur, "Let's handle this at home, away from everyone." "What did you say?" I demanded, deliberately raising my voice even louder. Adam froze, unable to respond, his usual composure faltering under the scrutiny of the crowd. I remained where I was, refusing to move to the next table. My gaze shifted back to Sarah, piercing her with an icy glare. Mike, sensing the tension, stepped in to mediate. "Sarah, thank your sister-in-law," he said, trying to lighten the mood. "If it weren't for her, you wouldn't be living so comfortably now. Or maybe an apology would be more appropriate." My voice was sharp, like ice cracking, as I added, "Yes, an apology seems fitting." Sarah, predictably, began to put on her signature performance. Her eyes turned red, glistening with unshed tears, as she looked at me with an expression of pitiable helplessness. The tears hovered on the brink of falling, but I had no patience for her theatrics. With a loud, resounding slap, I struck her face. The sound was crisp, cutting through the silence. This time, her tears fell freely. I raised my voice further, crying at my wedding. "What are you trying to do? Curse my family?" The surrounding area grew even quieter as all eyes turned toward us. Guests further away, unsure of what had happened, stood up to get a better look. Adam's mother hurried over, her face filled with concern. "What's going on here?" she asked uneasily. Adam, eager to downplay the situation, quickly intervened. "It's nothing, Mom, just a small misunderstanding," he said, trying to pull me away by force. I yanked my arm out of his grasp, raising it high to make my point. Then, pointing at Mike and Sarah, I turned to Adam's mother and said hoarsely, "No, Mom, this woman here is Sarah." The moment she showed up, she started crying, cursing our family. "I'm sure of it. If I didn't slap her, should I have let her stay the night instead?" Adam's mother paused, taking a moment to process what I'd said. She turned to Mike and said calmly, "Mike, it seems your girlfriend was crying just now." Mike, caught completely off guard, stood frozen, unable to come up with an explanation. Adam, too, was at a loss for words. He certainly couldn't admit, "Mom, Sarah wasn't crying until my wife slapped her." Adam's mother sighed helplessly and said, "Well, in that case, Mike, I'm sorry, but you'll need to take your girlfriend and leave for today. I'll come by your house another day to apologize properly." No, it's our fault," Mike stammered, his voice trembling. "We'll leave right away." I watched their retreating figures, my gaze never wavering. Just before they stepped out, Sarah turned back to look at me, her eyes filled with venom. In response, I gave her a cold, contemptuous smile, dripping with mockery and disdain. With the task accomplished and the drama subsided, I resumed accompanying Adam as we went table to table offering toasts. The main performance was over, and I felt a strange sense of detachment, the wedding banquet now seeming dull and uninteresting. For a long time after that day, both Mike and Sarah would find it hard to hold their heads up in our social circle. Their reputations were left tarnished, neither completely ruined nor entirely intact, but enough to make them the subject of whispers. As exhaustion settled in, I began to feel how monotonous the wedding festivities had become. That's when Fanny approached me, mentioning her requires some explanation. Fanny had played a significant role in my earlier life. When Adam's mother fell ill, the family initially hired a retired nurse as her caregiver. The nurse was competent and efficient, leaving little for me to do. However, Adam's mother's family later wrote to request that she take care of one of their own instead. The nurse was dismissed, and in her place came Fanny, a relative who had no experience in caregiving. Fanny was cunning, using her lack of knowledge as an excuse to avoid work whenever possible. She'd often say, "I don't know how to do this." But Claire learned so much from the nurse. She can handle it. When it came to undermining me and siding with Adam's mother, Fanny fully embraced her role as a loyal enforcer. I had initially planned to deal with Adam Johnson after the wedding, but I couldn't hold back today. I was in too good of a mood. No day was better than the present. Fanny sidled up to me and lowered her voice. "Your mother-in-law wants me to tell you to apologize to Mike's father later when you offer him a toast. We shouldn't be so harsh, even if we're in the right." That moment, I was standing with one hand on the table and the other holding a bowl of candy. As Fanny spoke, she draped her arm casually over my shoulder. Taking advantage of the situation, I pretended to be pushed by her, staggering backward and collapsing onto the ground. My hand, still gripping the tablecloth, yanked it down as I fell, dragging all the dishes and drinks onto the floor. The sound of plates shattering and cups crashing filled the banquet hall. Sitting on the floor, I kicked my legs and began wailing loudly. "I can't go through with this wedding. A mistress has already caused trouble, and now my mother-in-law wants me to endure it. How could I?" Adam hurried over to help me up, but I refused, staying firmly on the ground. In the end, he had no choice but to pick me up and carry me out. The banquet ended in complete disarray. Sarah's reputation was utterly ruined after this. She became the subject of public scorn, her name firmly nailed to the pillar of shame. At the same time, my own reputation as a shrew spread far and wide. But I knew better. In a society like ours, as long as you didn't care about your reputation, being labeled a shrew could bring certain advantages. Adam arranged for a driver to take me back to the bridal house while he stayed behind to clean up the mess. Watching his retreating figure, I couldn't help but smirk coldly. Back at the house, I poured myself a glass of the prepared wedding wine and drank it alone. After the two dramatic scenes at the banquet, I figured no one would dare come by to disrupt our bridal chamber. The warm alcohol burned as it slid down my throat, leaving me feeling exhilarated. I quickly fell into a deep sleep. Half asleep, I vaguely heard Adam return. He was talking with his secretary at the door. The secretary advised, "You shouldn't return to the family estate for a while. The impact is too damaging. It's better to wait until Claire is pregnant and your mother has calmed down before going back." Adam replied. That suited me just fine. I thought to myself as I drifted back to sleep. A sudden chill woke me, and I realized Adam had climbed into bed. He nudged me a few times, but seeing that I was sound asleep, he turned away and leaned against the headboard. He stayed in that position until dawn. Though I wasn't sleeping deeply, I could sense him sitting there alone, quietly crying through the night. What was he thinking? Did he regret marrying me? This was just the beginning. Whatever was to come, there was no avoiding it. To gain something, you always had to pay a price. For now, I still had to deal with trivial matters and petty people. It was an unavoidable phase, one I had to endure to grow stronger. After the wedding, I found time to go to the hospital for a tubal ligation, only to discover I was already pregnant. Without hesitation, I changed the procedure to an abortion. At the time, abortions were performed without anesthesia. A large, spoon-like tool was inserted into the uterus, scraping painfully until it felt as if every organ inside had been displaced. The procedure room was shared by multiple women, and the air was filled with the sounds of their agonized screams. The doctors were indifferent, offering no comfort as they went about their tasks with numb expressions. Shaking, I climbed off the surgical table and drank a bowl of brown sugar water to regain some strength. Deep down, I resolved that if I didn't achieve something significant in this life, I'd never forgive myself. I returned to my parents' home to recover, and took the opportunity to warn my mother about the importance of workplace safety, something she had overlooked in the past. I also arranged for my grandmother to undergo a full medical examination, covering the expenses myself. I suggested my parents bring her to live with them, given that my brother would need her house after his upcoming marriage. They agreed, saying it was better to make the move sooner rather than later. Adam visited me at my parents' home for a meal. He assumed I had returned to handle family matters and didn't question me much. Once back at the bridal house, I threw myself into my studies, preparing day and night for the upcoming college entrance exams. I still had a clear impression of the first exam papers. I had studied them extensively during my past attempts, but I couldn't afford to let my guard down. I had a discussion with Adam Johnson. With 6 months remaining until the college entrance exams, I told him that I wouldn't be working for the time being. He readily agreed, even honoring our pre-wedding agreement by handing over his full salary to me, leaving me in charge of giving him an allowance. The first time he came to borrow pocket money from me, I noticed a slight upward curve at the corners of his mouth, his expression genuinely cheerful. He was happy because this marked the first sign of reconciliation between us. I knew money wasn't an issue for him. Adam's parents both had substantial salaries and often supported him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to save so much to give me in the first place. But this act of handing over his earnings wasn't just about the money. It was a symbolic test of submission, one that established a clear sense of household hierarchy. In this life, I intended to carve out my space and maintain it. In my previous life, my personal space had been completely eroded by others. This time, if kindness couldn't flourish, then it would grow thorns instead. The shrew label was a shield that could protect me from easy attacks. Though it wasn't invincible, I avoided visiting Adam's family. But his mother wasn't about to let me off so easily. She sent someone to summon me, insisting that I return. I decided to face her directly. As soon as I stepped into their house, Adam's mother cast a cold glance my way, then gestured toward a dirty bedsheet placed conspicuously in the middle of the living room. Fanny's been sick these past few days, so I've had to handle the housework myself. This sheet is too heavy for me to clean. You can take care of it. Her tone was reasonable and calm, making it difficult for me to outright refuse. Back then, it was customary for daughters-in-law to visit their in-laws on weekends to clean the house. However, I wasn't intimidated. In my previous life, they had used the same tactics to corner me. Not only would they make me hand-wash bedsheets, but my mother-in-law also insisted that I hang them outside to absorb the fresh scent of sunlight. Every time I struggled to lift the heavy, waterlogged sheets onto the clothesline, I was left exhausted. During the winter, washing these sheets left me drenched in sweat, chilled to the bone, and my hands cracked and raw. This time, I tossed the bedsheet into a tub of water, gave it a symbolic few pats, and then retreated to a corner to read a book. When enough time had passed, I wrung the sheet out and hung it on the line. The spot I chose happened to be where a group of children was playing. As expected, the kids began crawling under and around the sheet, and before long, it fell to the ground. I took the opportunity to gather the children and their parents, complaining loudly, "I already washed this once, and I can't do it again. The sheet's filthy now, and my mother-in-law will be upset. Whoever's child knocked it down needs to clean it for me." This sparked chaos in the courtyard. Several families became involved, with some parents scolding their kids and others hurriedly washing the sheet. The whole area descended into noisy commotion. When Adam's father returned from work, he quickly pieced together what had happened. His face darkened as he glanced at me, then at Adam's mother. I didn't stick around for dinner and quietly slipped back home, my hands unharmed and my energy intact. Later, I heard that Adam's mother bore the brunt of the fallout. Adam's father gave her a thorough reprimand, saying, "You know she's a shrew, so why provoke her? You're just creating trouble for me. Even if she's like a mad dog lying quietly, why poke at her with a stick? This is on you." Adam's mother was so furious she cried nonstop. Adam, who only learned of the incident the next day, came home with a stiff expression. I wasn't about to hold back either. I greeted him with a cold face, slamming objects around as I moved. Suddenly, he grabbed my wrist, pulling me close. "Claire, you used to be the most gentle person. What's happened to you? You've become a completely different person," he said, his tone filled with frustration and confusion. Even though Adam Johnson held me in his arms, I didn't even glance at him. What was this? Was he planning to confront me about something? He let out a sigh. I wouldn't dare. I let out a sarcastic laugh. In my previous life, when I was meek and submissive, he had teamed up with his mother to bully me, so I responded curtly, "Good. You shouldn't. Your family's problems are for your family to handle. Fanny claims she's too sick to work? Then hire another housekeeper. You replaced the old nanny with her during my wedding, and now she's slacking off. Leaving me to do the work? What kind of nonsense is that? Adam looked at me, shocked. Claire, why are you using such foul language? You're supposed to be preparing for college. So what if I use foul language? When your family behaves this shamelessly, what am I supposed to say? Sweet words. I snapped. If this doesn't work out, we'll just divorce. He stared at me in disbelief. Claire, why do you keep talking about divorce? Who would you even find after me? I replied lightly. Some people are more trouble to have than to live without. His face turned pale. My reputation as a shrew had already spread, and Adam's mother was caught in a dilemma. Her facade of gentleness and propriety was beginning to crack. She wanted me to return to their home, so she could continue her attempts to manipulate me. But everyone knew I wasn't one to back down. If she tried to make me work, it would only cause more trouble for herself. Yet, not asking me to come back left her feeling uneasy. In the meantime, she resorted to badmouthing me to Adam, claiming they'd married the wrong woman and that I lacked any of the virtues expected of a proper wife. I learned all this from a few women in the compound who were friendly with me and equally outspoken. One of them, Cassie, was particularly close to me. She worked nearby and often came by to chat. When Adam came home, I adopted a cold demeanor and refused to talk to him. My approach was simple: preemptive silent treatment. I wanted him to feel the frustration his family had caused me. Whatever arguments he'd planned to make fell flat under my cold indifference. Occasionally, he even tried to placate me. Honey, why are you upset? Is it the stress from studying? How about we go to the park this weekend and take a boat ride? Meanwhile, Adam's mother often lamented at home, practically beating her chest in frustration. But there was little she could do about me. I had no concern for appearances, and though she tried to assert her authority as the elder, I met her as an equal, turning her into my sparring partner. After months of this back and forth, the day of the college entrance exams finally arrived. Thanks to a combination of preparation and favorable circumstances, I was admitted to the best university in the country, located in Beijing. When I received the acceptance letter, I broke down and cried. This was the opportunity one had waited 2 lifetimes for. I was finally leaving this place. Sarah and Mike both got into a local university. Adam had already been accepted to college long ago, and was now in his final year, set to graduate in 1 more year. As everyone prepared to go their separate ways, Adam's mother suggested he divorce me, but he refused. That night, Adam sat alone with a plate of chives and a bottle of liquor, drinking by himself. When I returned home from visiting my family, it was already late. Adam, slightly tipsy and flushed, looked at me and said, Claire, if I hadn't given your city quota to Sarah back then, would things have turned out differently between us? I didn't respond, but I already knew the answer in my heart. Someone who would betray me once would always take that step. No matter the circumstances, there was no happy ending for the two of us. We were destined for failure. These past 6 months of living in enemy territory had been anything but easy. I gritted my teeth and kept going, enduring everything thrown my way. As Lu Sun once said, true warriors dare to face the bleakness of life and the bloodiness of reality. That quote had been my constant encouragement, helping me make it this far. 3 years passed in a flash. During those years, I maintained a distant but civil relationship with Adam Johnson. The long-distance separation and infrequent visits led to a natural cooling of our relationship. But that wasn't my fault. Mike, after completing his first year of university, was sent abroad on an exchange program. For the next 2 years, only Sarah and Adam remained in our hometown. Mike once again asked Adam to look after Sarah. Over those 2 years, their interactions became more frequent. After the fiasco at the wedding banquet, I couldn't understand what Mike was thinking. He wasn't the type to be overly sentimental, as far as I knew. But Sarah's lack of discretion surprised me. In my previous life, I had thought their initial interactions were pure and unintentional. However, now it seemed clear that at least Sarah had other intentions. My guess was that she feared Mike wouldn't return and decided to latch onto Adam as her backup plan. Adam later wrote me a letter explaining the situation. He admitted he felt guilty about what happened during the wedding banquet. He claimed Mike had asked for his help, but not to the extent of touching my city quota. That, Adam said, was entirely his fault. He also admitted responsibility for the public embarrassment Mike's family endured at the banquet. Therefore, he felt obligated to continue looking after Sarah and assured me I had nothing to worry about. I didn't reply. That winter break, I returned home for the first time in a long while. As soon as I stepped into the house, I found only Adam and Sarah inside. The two of them were busy in the kitchen and didn't notice my arrival. Without saying a word, I quietly left and headed straight to the Johnson family estate, where I sought out Cassie and a few other women we all knew. These women were well known for their gossip and lack of fear when it came to stirring up trouble. When we entered my house together, the sound of Adam and Sarah laughing and chatting in the kitchen was crystal clear. I looked at my companions with a wry smile. See? I wasn't wrong about them, was I? Their expressions were filled with disdain and scorn. I handed out snacks, peanuts and sunflower seeds, and we all sat down, waiting for the show to begin. When Adam and Sarah finally came out of the kitchen with plates of food, they froze at the sight of the room full of people. The atmosphere, which had been faintly intimate, suddenly became unbearably awkward under the scrutiny of so many witnesses. Adam hurriedly set the dishes on the table, removed his apron, and nervously wiped his hands. Approaching me with a hint of panic, he said, "Why didn't you let me know you were coming back? I could have picked you up at the train station." I gave him a cold, mocking smile. "Oh, I've been hearing rumors about you too, so I thought I'd pay a surprise visit, see if I could catch you red-handed. And wouldn't you know it, you didn't disappoint me." Then I raised my voice, rallying the women. "What are you all waiting for? Let's go." With that, I led the charge, slamming my glass onto the table as a signal. I grabbed Sarah by the hair and shoved her to the ground. "You shameless tramp. Can't keep your hands off other women's men, can you? Is that the only way you know how to live? A good university student. And yet you'd rather play the mistress." The other women jumped in, gleefully joining the fray. Adam finally snapped out of his shock and rushed to pull us apart. In the chaos, someone scratched his face, leaving him looking disheveled and utterly humiliated. We didn't hit Sarah hard, just enough to teach her a lesson. The goal was to shame her, not cause serious harm. By the time it was over, Sarah was a mess, her dignity in tatters. The spectacle ended with everyone dispersing, leaving behind a thoroughly embarrassed Adam and Sarah. I walked away, my head held high, knowing the message had been sent. We left triumphantly, but the news of catching Adam Johnson and Sarah red-handed spread like wildfire. Not satisfied with that, I later went to Sarah's school and caused a scene, ensuring her reputation was further tarnished. Although she eventually graduated, she didn't secure a position at the university. Instead, she was assigned to work in the remote countryside, where she was most needed. The time she had schemed to skip her rural service was now reclaimed. Later, I heard that Sarah had once again lost all of Mike's hard-earned money in the stock market. Furious, Mike returned to the country and caused an uproar. This time, however, I wasn't there to be Adam's scapegoat, nor did Adam step in to clean up Sarah's mess. Desperate and without recourse, Mike went to extreme lengths, nearly ruining Sarah's life entirely. I didn't let Adam off the hook either. I went to his workplace, accusing him of poor morals and improper conduct. Even as his wife, my words planted doubt in his colleagues and supervisors, undermining their trust in him. After several such disruptions, Adam's career began to suffer significant setbacks, and any future promotions became unlikely. His mother once again urged him to divorce me, but Adam refused. Around the same time, Adam's mother fell ill, just as she had in my previous life. However, this time, instead of finding joy in tormenting me, she faced her illness amid the strain of Adam's professional and personal struggles. Her condition worsened rapidly, and she passed away a few years later. One evening, I looked at Adam with a faint smile and asked him, "Why don't you just divorce me? Wouldn't you be free then?" He sighed deeply. "My mother suggested it, and I've seriously considered it. I was even tempted. But one night, I had a dream. I dreamed we had a child, that you didn't get into college and had a miserable life. I dreamed I wasn't a good husband or father, that I was unfaithful and entangled with others. When I woke up, I decided that no matter how you treat me, I'll treat you well for the rest of my life." I was stunned. His words caught me completely off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. That marked the end of our conversation. When I received news that I had been chosen for a government-sponsored study abroad program, Adam came to see me again. With sincerity in his voice, he said, "I truly wish you the best in this life. I'll wait for you at home, and I won't make any more mistakes." After arriving in America and settling my enrollment, I wrote Adam a letter, the first I had ever written to him voluntarily. The timing was deliberate. I waited until everything regarding my studies was finalized, fearing he might interfere if I wrote too soon. In the letter, I wrote, "After securing the study abroad opportunity, I began guarding myself against you. I knew Sarah had applied for the same program. Since these spots aren't determined by universities, but allocated by the Ministry of Education, I was worried you might try to help her and compete with me again. That's why I staged the scene to ruin both of your reputations in advance. It's called being proactive, preventing trouble before it happens. Of course, if you two were clean and innocent, I wouldn't have had the chance. But Adam, this is who you are. A man I have to constantly guard against. An unreliable husband. We lost all trust in each other long ago. Separation is the best choice for both of us. Dragging this out benefits no one. I'm always on edge, fearing betrayal from you. And I'll never forgive you for the past. Don't delay the divorce. Think it over carefully." When I returned to visit my family, Adam and I finalized the divorce. He sighed deeply and said, "In my last life, I failed you. In this life, I'll let you go." I looked at him coldly. "I hope we never meet again in the next life." Afterward, I returned to America and immersed myself in promoting China's reform and opening up policies among the overseas Chinese community. I encouraged Chinese expatriates to invest back home, leveraging the era's economic opportunities, where trades like exchanging shirts for airplanes were becoming reality. Later, when I returned to China, I used the money I had earned from working and studying abroad, combined with advanced management ideas, to contribute to the country's industrial and economic revitalization. This, I believed, was the best way to make my second chance at life truly meaningful.